The wind kicked up the dust like 1,000 angry spirits, rattling the sun-bleached signs and howling through the narrow main street of Dry Creek. The day was dying, the sky painted in bruised shades of purple and red, while the distant silhouettes of canyons jagged the horizon like broken teeth. Heat still clung to the earth, thick and stubborn, making every breath taste of grit and sweat. Eliza Gray moved through the market, like a shadow nobody wanted. A smear of dirt streaked her cheek, hair tangled and wild as prairie grass, her dress a faded thing that might once have been blue. She clutched a basket filled with withered herbs and stringy roots, head low, eyes sharp. The townsfolk parted around her as though her poverty might be catching. "Well, if it ain't Ragged Lizzie," sneered Martha Colburn, fat and pink-faced, with a hand on her plump hip. "Came to trade your dirt for bread, did you?" Laughter rippled from the cluster of women like the clink of dirty coins. Eliza said nothing. Words never softened a hungry stomach. At the edge of the stalls, the town's men gathered near the saloon, nursing bottles and swapping stories, the air thick with the stench of horse and tobacco. One of them, a stringy youth with mean eyes, spat into the dust as she passed. "Storm's comin', Ragged Lizzie. You best be hidin' in a hole somewhere." She didn't spare them a glance. The sound of a hammer cocking stopped her in her tracks. A boy, no older than 8, had dropped a crude slingshot, eyes wide as saucers. His mother snatched him by the arm. "Tommy, get away from her," the woman hissed, shooting Eliza a glare sharp enough to skin a man alive. The boy hesitated, then ran. A dry cough rattled in Eliza's throat. She pressed a hand to her chest and kept walking. The rumors had started 2 nights back. The Black Vultures, a gang of killers and thieves, were moving through the territory, leaving burned homesteads and butchered families in their wake. The sheriff had ridden out to gather help, but no one seen him since. The fear clung to the town like the lingering stink of gunpowder. Eliza felt it too. Not fear of death. That was an old, familiar thing, but of memories. The kind that crawled into your bed at night, cold as a snake, and whispered names you couldn't forget. She reached the general store, pausing beneath its warped awning. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of stale tobacco and sun-baked leather. Mr. Pike, the storekeeper, didn't look up from his ledger. "Need flour," Eliza murmured. Pike scratched his chin, his jowls quivering like old saddle leather. "Ain't got none for the likes of you." "I got coin." "Don't want it." A muscle twitched in her jaw. She set a single silver piece on the counter, gleaming amid the dust. Pike slid it back with a crooked finger. "Find your bread somewhere else." A voice from the back called, "Ain't no place for vagrants in Dry Creek. Get gone, Lizzie." The old names didn't sting like they used to. Not much did. She left the store as a rider appeared at the far end of town, a lone figure cut sharp against the dying light. The stranger wore a coat the color of midnight, hat brim pulled low, a rifle slung across his saddle. The wind tossed his coat tails like a pair of black wings. He watched her. Eliza's pulse quickened. That face dusted with road grit, eyes like polished gunmetal. It had been years, but some faces carved themselves deep into your bones. The rider tugged his hat lower and turned his horse toward the livery. Eliza crossed the road, heading for the outskirts where graves huddled beneath the lone mesquite. The market behind her faded into the hush of twilight. She knelt by a simple marker, the name weather-worn but etched into her heart, Samuel Gray. A sprig of dry wildflowers lay there, brittle and crumbling. "Storm's comin', Sam," she whispered. "A bad one." A coyote's howl floated over the hills. She traced the letters with a finger, feeling the old ache twist through her chest. She'd buried him with his gun in his hand, a man too quick for his time, cut down by cowards who feared what they couldn't match. A boot scuffed behind her spun her around. It was the boy Tommy, dirt-smudged and wide-eyed, clutching a whittled piece of wood. I'm sorry, ma'am," he stammered. Eliza crouched, the dirt cool beneath her knees. "What for?" "For them calling you names. You ain't bad." She gave a thin smile, more ghost than warmth. "Takes more than names to hurt me, boy." He nodded, swallowed hard, and held out the carving. It was a crude bird, wings spread. "Made it," he mumbled. Figured you could have it. The simple kindness hit like a sucker punch. Before she could speak, his mother's voice cut through the dusk. Tommy, you get away from her. He flinched, ran. Eliza tucked the carving into her basket, the wood rough against her fingers. The last light slipped behind the hills as the wind rose again, carrying the scent of sweat, gun oil, and coming violence. The vultures were near. She felt it in her marrow. A storm was coming, and God help Dry Creek when it hit. Night fell thick and heavy over Dry Creek. Lanterns flickered like nervous fireflies along the porches, their glow barely holding back the dark. Somewhere, a dog barked once, then went silent. The town shrank inward, doors bolted, shutters drawn, voices hushed to fearful murmurs. Every man, woman, and child knew what came with the night. Eliza Gray sat alone in the cramped room above the derelict stable where she rented space. The window was cracked, letting in the cool air and distant scent of sagebrush. Her basket sat on the table, the carved bird beside a bone-handled knife and a half-empty flask. She turned the bird over in her fingers, the wood warm from the boy's hand. The memory gnawed at her, not the insult of the market, nor the hard stares of townsfolk, but the boy's courage. That small spark, flickering in a town already half dead with fear. A sharp rap at the door made her hand dart to the knife. "It's open," she called. The door eased inward, and there stood the stranger in the midnight coat, hat in hand, dust clinging to him like a second skin. He didn't speak, just closed the door behind him and leaned against it, eyes sweeping the room like a man measuring his distance to the exits. "Took you long enough," Eliza said, voice low. The corner of his mouth twitched. "Didn't figure you'd still be here." "Well, I am." He stepped forward into the lamplight, and she saw the years written in the lines of his face, the streaks of gray in his hair. Jesse Hale, once a legend with a rifle, now another ghost riding the old trails. "They're coming tonight," he said. "I know." He nodded toward the basket. "You gonna fight?" "I didn't bury Sam to let them sons of bitches burn this town down." A silence settled between them, thick with old hurt. Outside, a gust rattled the window pane. "You still carry it?" Jesse asked. Without a word, Eliza reached beneath the table and drew out a long-barreled Colt. The metal gleamed like oil in the lamplight. It had been Sam's. She'd oiled it every Sunday since the day she laid him in the ground. Jesse let out a breath. "Good." He took a flask from his coat, drank deep, and passed it to her. Whiskey burned down her throat, sharp and clean. "How many?" she asked. 10, maybe 12. Sawyer's leading him." The name made her stomach knot. Emmett Sawyer, the butcher of Red Bluff. Big as a bull, with a face like a split rock, and a taste for cruelty. She remembered the stories. What he did to the women before he left their homes in ash. "Eliza," Jesse hesitated. "You don't owe these people nothing." She stared at him. "I owe that boy." That settled it. Footsteps pounded up the stairs, and a thick-set man burst through the door. Deputy Anders, red-faced and breathless, one hand resting on his holster like he wasn't sure what to do with it. "They're here," he wheezed. "Saw him riding down from the North Ridge. Torches and rifles." "Where's the sheriff?" Jesse asked. Anders swallowed hard. "Ain't come back. Might not be coming." Coward, Eliza thought, but said nothing. Anders's eyes darted to her, wary. "Look, Miss Gray, you best hole up somewhere. This ain't your fight." Jesse snorted. "Ain't nobody else standing, Anders. Or you gonna tell me you plan to hold that badge up like a shield when Sawyer comes calling?" Anders looked down, shame burning his face. "Get the folk who can shoot," Jesse ordered. "Half a dozen men'll do. The rest, tell them to stay inside, lamps out. Anders, if you run, I'll put a bullet in your back myself." Anders paled but nodded and left, boots clattering down the stairs. Eliza holstered the Colt and slung a Winchester over her shoulder. Jesse checked his rifle, the well-worn movement like a preacher thumbing his Bible. "You ever think we'd end up like this?" Jesse asked quietly. "Always did." They made their way to the edge of town where a few men had gathered, farmhands and store clerks with rifles held too tight, faces slick with sweat. Among them was old Clem Dawes, who ran the livery, and young Caleb Mercer, barely 17, but with his father's revolver strapped to his hip. Jesse sized them up. "If you're staying, you listen sharp. Don't waste shots. Don't run. And if one of you falls, you step over the body and keep shooting." No one spoke. The crackle of torch flames down the road answered for them. The black vultures came into view, a line of mounted men, faces half-shadowed, weapons gleaming. At their head rode Emmett Sawyer, thick-necked and grinning, a torch in one hand, a shotgun in the other. "Well, well," Sawyer bellowed. "Look at this. Dry Creek's finest." His eyes landed on Eliza, and his grin widened. "Ain't this a picture? Ragged Lizzie playing gunslinger." Jesse stepped forward. "You're not talking this town, Sawyer." Sawyer laughed. "I see one, maybe two real gun hands. The rest of you look like Sunday farmers. You hand over your coin and supplies. Maybe we leave you breathing." "No," Eliza said. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Sawyer's face darkened. "Then it's your graves." The night held its breath. Jesse chambered around. Eliza did the same. 6 others followed. The vultures lowered their torches. The first shot cracked the dark, and the world split wide open. Gunfire ripped through the night, like lightning tearing open a storm. Dry Creek, so long a hushed, fearful town, screamed alive with the sharp report of rifles and the answering boom of shotguns. Sparks flew from torchlight as bullets found flesh and wood alike. Horses reared and shrieked, men cursed, some fell, and the thin line of defenders clung to their ground by sheer defiance. Eliza crouched behind an overturned trough, the Winchester tight against her shoulder. A man lunged from the shadow ahead, a wild-eyed outlaw with a hatchet raised high. She shot him through the throat. Blood fanned the air like dark paint, and he crumpled without a word. Left side. Jesse Hale's voice cut through the chaos. She turned, fired. Another man, one of Sawyer's, tumbled from his horse. The animal bolted, dragging the corpse by one boot caught in a stirrup. A brutal grin carved Jesse's face as he reloaded, the years shedding from him in the heat of battle. He moved like a man born to violence, placing each shot with a surgeon's precision. But their line was thin, and the vultures were many. Caleb Mercer crouched beside her, his hands shaking as he tried to reload the revolver. His freckled face glistened with sweat, lips white with terror. "Easy, boy," she told him. "Steady your hands. You want to see morning. Don't fumble." He swallowed and nodded, gritting his teeth. They kept firing. A man beside Clem Dawes took a slug in the chest and dropped like a sack of grain. Clem barely flinched, yanking the fallen man's rifle and squeezing off a shot that tore the ear clean off one of the vultures. Through it all, Sawyer loomed. Emmett Sawyer, unflinching atop his broad-chested horse, roaring commands and laughing between volleys like a man already drunk on slaughter. "Come on, Lizzie," he bellowed. "Let's end this old dance." Eliza's jaw clenched at the name. Ragged Lizzie, the name Dry Creek had given her after Sam's death, when dirt streaked her face in grief, made her a ghost in her own skin. A name the town spat when she passed, as though mourning was a crime. Tonight, it would be the name Sawyer choked on. Another shot cracked close, a vulture falling hard near the well. Blood ran in rivulets along the packed dirt street, glinting black in the dim torchlight. The defenders' line sagged, their ammunition thinning. "Fall back to the mercantile." Jesse shouted, "Make our last stand there." The townsfolk scrambled. Eliza fired once more, then bolted, dragging Caleb with her. Bullets punched splinters from the posts around them as they ducked inside the old mercantile. Windows were already boarded, the counter overturned for cover. 2 men bled on the floor. Anders crouched in a corner, face pale as a ghost. "Help them." Eliza snapped at the deputy, nodding to the wounded. He hesitated. She leveled the Colt at him. "Now." He scurried to obey. Jesse took a spot by the door, rifle aimed through a gap in the boards. "They'll be on us fast." "Let him come," Eliza said, teeth bared. Her heart hammered, blood hot, and thick in her ears. Then came the clatter of hooves and a heavy boot striking the door. It shuddered but held. "Lizzie Gray." Sawyer's voice thundered through the walls. "Ain't no need for the rest of 'em to die. You step out now. I'll let these good folks live." Otherwise, we burn it down with you in it." Silence. Every breath in the room held. Jesse's eyes met hers. A question there. Eliza stood slowly, holstering the Colt, slinging the Winchester onto her back. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but fury. Fury for every whispered insult, every turn back, every gutless lawman, every son of a bitch who thought a widow was an easy mark. "I'm ending this," she said. Jesse started to protest, but something in her face shut him up. "Cover me." And then she was out the door. The night air bit cold against her skin, and the street swam with smoke and blood. Sawyer waited, towering in the saddle, his grin a crooked scar. "Didn't think you had the grit, Lizzie." "Stop calling me that." She drew the Colt, thumbed back the hammer. "My name's Eliza Gray." Sawyer chuckled. "You think you can outdraw me, little woman?" "No," she said, leveling the barrel. "I don't aim to draw." Her shot split the air before his fingers even touched his holster. It struck him high in the chest, snapping him back in the saddle. He toppled like a felled oak, crashing to the dirt with a hollow thud. The vultures hesitated, their leader dead. The fight bled out of them. "Drop your irons." Jesse's voice roared from the mercantile, rifle aimed dead center on the next man's heart. "Or we'll cut you all down right here." One by one, rifles clattered to the ground. Eliza stepped forward, boots slick with blood. "Pick up your dead," she told them coldly, "and get out of Dry Creek. If I see one of you within 100 miles, you'll wish you died tonight." No one argued. The black vultures gathered their wounded and scattered into the darkness. Eliza stood in the center of the street, gun still in hand, smoke rising in thin coils from the barrel. The town of Dry Creek, for the first time in years, was quiet, and Eliza Gray was no one's ragged Lizzie now. By dawn, the scent of gunpowder still lingered in the air, a burnt tang that clung to every timber beam and weather-worn fence post. Dry Creek was quiet in a way it hadn't been for years, not the hush of fear or suspicion, but the wary stillness of a town learning to breathe again. The bodies had been cleared from the street before the sun broke the horizon, leaving only dark stains in the dirt where blood had soaked in. The black vultures were gone, what remained of them scattering to the hills, like whipped dogs. No one chased them. There'd been enough dying for one night. Inside the gray homestead, the long dining table gleamed with fresh polish, its battered surface scrubbed clean of dust and grime. It had once belonged to Eliza's father, passed to her when she married Sam Gray. For years, it had sat in an empty house, used only for setting down grief and unanswered prayers. Now it was set for supper. Biscuits rested in a woven basket, steam curling from a pot of stew thick with beans and salted beef. A bottle of whiskey sat unopened at the center, flanked by mismatched glasses. Candles burned low in their holders, the flickering light chasing long shadows from the corners. Eliza moved through the room in silence, her fingers brushing the backs of the chairs. The Colt rested on the sideboard within reach. Her hair was combed, face scrubbed clean of the dirt and blood that had streaked it just hours before. There were lines around her eyes now that hadn't been there a year ago, but something harder, clearer lived behind them too. A knock came at the door. She opened it to find Jesse Hale leaning against the frame, hat in hand. He looked bone-weary, his duster streaked with road dust and dried blood, but there was a glint of stubborn pride in his expression. "Brought a bottle," he said, lifting a half-empty jug of rye. "Figured we could use it." "You figured right." He stepped inside, glancing around the room with an approving grunt. "Place looks near respectable. First time in a long while." More footsteps sounded behind him. Clem Dawes entered, still wearing his patched vest, a raw scrape along his cheek. Anders came next, his deputy star hanging askew, though he held himself straighter than before. Even Caleb Mercer appeared, hat clutched tight in both hands, his youthful face pale but determined. One by one, they took seats at the table. Eliza watched them as they settled, men who had faced death mere hours ago and chosen, for the first time in years, to stand their ground. They spoke little at first, spooning stew into bowls and tearing hunks of bread. The only sounds were clinking silver and the low murmur of a night wind pressing against the walls. It was Jesse who finally broke the silence. He raised his glass. "To those who didn't see the dawn," he said, voice rough, "and to the ones who made sure we did." The others echoed the toast. Eliza's throat tightened as she lifted her own glass, the burn of whiskey chasing the tight, knot from her chest. "They'll be talking about last night from here to Tucson," Clem said, leaning back with a satisfied grunt. "Can't say I mind the idea of them vultures running scared for once." "They'll send word," Anders warned. "Might be others. Outlaws don't leave debts like this unpaid." Eliza met his gaze. "Then let him come." It wasn't bravado. The room felt it. The vultures had thought Dry Creek was a carcass fit for picking, easy meat. What they'd found was a town that still had teeth, and a woman who no longer cared for their kind. "Town's yours now, Miss Gray," Jesse said softly. "That sheriff's badge is still open. Could be yours, if you'd wear it." She gave a faint, humorless smile. "I've had enough of men telling me where I belong." A ripple of laughter, easy and worn, passed around the table. Caleb smiled too, though his eyes remained watchful. The meal went on, simple and unhurried. Outside, the sky shifted from pale orange to deep blue, stars winking one by one into view. The candles burned low, their flames steady. At last, when plates were empty and glasses drained, Eliza rose. She picked up the unopened bottle at the center of the table, its label faded. "Sam kept this for the day we drove the bastards out," she said. "Been waiting too long." She broke the seal and poured. The scent of aged whiskey filled the room, heavy and sharp. She raised her glass. "To the ones we lost, and to this table, may it never sit empty again." They drank. It wasn't much. It wouldn't mend every scar. But it was a start. When the others filed out, leaving promises of returning in the morning to finish clearing debris and mend fences, Jesse lingered by the door. "You sure about this, Eliza?" he asked quietly. "There'll be others, sooner or later. This kind of peace don't last long out here." "I know." He studied her, then nodded. "Still, it's a good thing you did." "I didn't do it for good," she said, watching the empty street beyond. "I did it because it was ours." And with that, Jesse tipped his hat and vanished into the night. Eliza stood in the doorway for a long time after, the cool wind tugging at the loose strands of her hair. The land stretched out before her, wide and wild and indifferent. Dry Creek still bore the marks of its wounds, but it had endured, and so had she. For the first time in a long while, she stepped back inside and took her place at the head of the table.